and that's no joke. Good morning. Hadn't heard the bell, but I've got 9 o'clock on my Mickey. We generally start out, pardon? Ding, there we go. We generally start out with a few announcements about sick and all, but this week I want to start out with one of the great things that happened this week. I got an email that Emma had decided to become a Christian, and her dad baptized her this week. So we have another, the angels rejoice again. Second greatest announcement then would be there's a new person in the Clunch clan. Came out 10-2, which is a kind of big baby, but all's well with mom and kids, so that's also great news. Now, on the not so great, we just need to keep in mind all of those that are on the sick and injured list. And I got a note here from Glenda that Tina has had a setback and she won't be going home today from the hospital, and Rosie's there with her. Brother Terry looks like he is feeling pretty good today, so we still need to keep him in our thoughts and prayers, and Janice, as she's still working with the digestive issue. Keep in mind those that are have lost loved ones this week, the Littles. Yes, ma'am. That's correct. And have they decided on a course of treatment for him yet, or? I got to get his strength up and get him stable before they can go into anything else. Okay. Anyone else on the? Yes, ma'am. Wow. And had a heart bypass, emergency bypass. 1, 2, or 3. Oh. Okay. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Amy is going to have, I know y'all didn't hear Diane, but Amy's going to have surgery Tuesday, removing a cyst, if they can get her blood pressure stabilized. So keep her in their prayers. Anyone else? Okay. Brother Terry, do you feel like giving a prayer, please?
those that serve with you, Father, it is our desire to become more like our Savior and bring the same. Father, may we continue to grow and praise you for these your death.
Amen. I did forget one announcement that I was going to make. We had so many good ones. This is another good one. I just want to thank everyone that had contributed to getting the camera back in operation. We didn't have to go into the church treasury for that, thankfully, and all those that contributed, thank you. We now have a valuable tool back in operation. Also, ladies' breakfast is coming up a week from this Saturday, so make plans for that. If you hadn't got your name on the list, please do so we make sure we got enough food. I'm sorry? This coming Saturday? Excuse me. I guess I better get ready. All right. I'm glad somebody knows when it is. So this Saturday, and we'll start feeding, 9 o'clock? Food will be ready at 9 o'clock, so says the chef. So today and Wednesday, we are supposed to, according to our schedule, finish the book of Exodus, which, if you notice, that leaves about 6 chapters. I'm going to do the best I can, no guarantees, but we're getting into a section that sort of overlaps and goes back and covers some other things. So my plan is we'll talk about whatever we need to talk about, but there's some things that we're not going to think about every peg that was driven or every ring or things of that nature. We'll just go into some of the other things. And to start with, chapter 35 actually goes back to chapter 31 and verse 18 and picks up there. As you read Scripture and study Scripture, there's a lot of times throughout the Bible where they take a thought and go this way, and then they have to back up and, well, they don't have to, but they'll back up and cover it from a little bit different angle or go into more detail. And that's what's happening here. So to start with, in verse 1 of chapter 35, the first 3 verses deal with the Sabbath day, either observation or regulation, whichever one you want to talk about. And if you go back into Exodus chapter 16 and verse 23, that starts it out. Well, let's just look back there. Exodus 16 and 23. It says, and he said unto them, this is that which the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which you will bake today, and seeth, and that which remaineth lay up for you to keep until the morning. So there is the hint or the implication that on a Sabbath day they're not supposed to do anything. Well, these first 3 verses then pick that up and go a little bit into detail and get more specific. It starts out with Moses gathered the whole congregation. That means everybody that left the land of Egypt, got them together and said, these are the words which the Lord hath commanded that ye should do them. 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day there shall be to you an holy day, a Sabbath day of rest to the Lord. Whosoever doeth work therein shall be put to death. Ye shall kindle no fire throughout your habitations upon the Sabbath day. So, as I said, in chapter 16, there was a hint that they needed to observe that day. And now we get to this chapter, and it goes into detail and telling them what they can and can't do for their observance of the Sabbath day. Questions, comments? The next part of the chapter goes into the contribution for the tabernacle, and then the last section will, even into the next chapter, will be dealing with the construction of the tabernacle. We're not going to read all the verses. I've got a few that I've highlighted that I just want to talk about. And if anybody wants to talk about anything else, please do so. But when we start with verse 4, again, Moses was speaking to the congregation and said, "This is the thing which the Lord commanded, saying, Take ye from among you an offering unto the Lord." Now, as we look at the Mosaical law, they had things that they were required to do. However, anytime something is required of you, do you have to do it? And those that there are some who do, but do it grudgingly. So there's a spectrum there that you can cover. But look at the next phrase, and that's the one I want to key on. It says, "Whosoever is of a willing heart." When we go all the way back into the well, if we look at the whole Bible, everything goes with the heart. There's a verse in Psalm 119. I can't remember the exact verse, but it's something around 9, 10, or 11 that says, "Thy word have I hidden in my heart, that I might not sin against thee." Why is it put in the heart? It's put there because it's important. It's something I want to remember, and it stays close to me. And so whosoever is of a willing heart. Today, and it's just like, I didn't mean to tie this in with it, but it seems to fit. A few weeks ago, we had told you that the church treasury was a little bit on the weak side. We needed a new camera, and we asked if anybody would be willing to give. I just made the announcement that we got enough that we paid for it without going to the church treasury. Those that gave, why did you give? Was it of necessity? There was a need, but why did you give? Because you had a willing heart. You were wanting to do something to help. And I think that's where this ties in. And then it just goes on to finish the verse saying, "Let him bring it," and tells what offerings that they have to bring and everything. And when we get down to verse, it talks about all the gold, purple, ram skins. Again, Brother Jeremy talked about the tabernacle a couple of weeks ago, had a video on the tabernacle. So I don't think we need to try to remember or get into all the different materials that were used and symbolism of those materials. But we know, and I talked about the priest garments and the ephod and all, and here's mentioned again the onyx stones, etc. But when we get down to verse 11, it says, "The tabernacle of his tent and his covering, his thatches and his boards, his pillars, and his sockets." Let's go back to Exodus chapter 25. And verse 9 and 10. "According to all that I show thee, after the pattern of the tabernacle and the pattern of all the instruments thereof, even so shall ye make it. And they shall make an ark of shittim wood, 2 cubits and a half shall be the length thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the breadth thereof, and 1 cubit and a half the height thereof." So when it gets down to verse 11 in chapter 35 that we're looking at, the tabernacle, tent, coverings, and all, where does all that come from? From whose mind? Who designed it? God did. And the instructions were given that they were going to carry all of this out. And here, particularly when we're talking about the ark and the mercy seat, we're talking about the Holy of Holy places. The next verse, verse 12, says, the ark and the staves thereof with the mercy seat and the veil of the covering. Now, the veil of the covering here is slightly different than the covering that's in verse 11. In verse 11, it's the tabernacle, his tent, and his covering. So, what is the description giving in verse 11? I'm sorry? The framing or the whole tabernacle, the entire thing. And here, when it talks in verse 11, when we're getting down to specifics, the veil of the covering would be the entrance curtains into the Holy of Holy where the ark is. And then verses 13 on down talks about the tables and lamps and everything that's looked at there. And then we'll get into the priest garments, etc. And verse 21 says, and they came, everyone whose heart stirred him up, and everyone whom his spirit made willing, and they brought the Lord's offering to the work of the tabernacle of the congregation, and for all his service, and for the holy garments. Just want to put you back in that time frame for just a minute and think about when they made that exodus out of Egypt. What frame of mind were the Israelites in when they were being led out of Egypt? Pharaoh had finally said, get out of here. What was their frame of mind? Pardon? Joyous. I think that is a proper way to look at it. I know if I had been in that situation and somebody finally said, okay, I'm opening the door, you can go, I'd be real happy about the situation. Now, what happened a day or two, about a day or two later, what mood were they in when they saw Pharaoh chasing them? Not so happy anymore. Now they're aggravated at God? No, they're aggravated at Moses. They blame Moses for bringing them out, even though it was God's plan, but they're not happy. From then until now, the months that have passed, we've read through here, you've seen them ride the roller coaster. There's times there's happy, there's times there's aggravation. And I think this verse, particularly because it ties back with verse 5, those that had a willing heart. How many would have a willing heart to give after this? It would be those that would be what? Let me back up a second. You can take any group of people you want to. You can even take this group right here. And there's going to be some that are always positive and optimistic and looking for the best outcome. Don't worry, I'm not going to name names. There's going to be others who, with a little bit of aggravation going on, they're going to take a negative view. And then there's those all the way in between. The point I'm trying to make is when he says those of a willing heart, there's going to be some in that group that are still not wanting to participate and do their part. When we get over here to verse 21, there's going to be those that are stirred up and ready to go. And I'll even put it this way. When this congregation asked for people to show up and go out door knocking, now there's those that can't because of physical reasons, for work reasons, for any slew of reasons, verifiable, justifiable, whatever way you want to put it. But when we call for people to go out and knock on doors and invite people in, how many don't show up? And answer this for yourself. I don't want a show of hands or anything. Just answer it for yourself. How many of you sit at home and don't participate just because it's a choice. If you do that, your heart has not been stirred. You're not ready. You're not going to do the Lord's work. So I take it to be that kind of situation here with this group that came out of Egypt. There's going to be some that's not going to want to participate no matter what. There's going to be some that get moved and stirred up to do it. And in verse 22, it says, and they came, both men and women, as many as were willing-hearted. So that tells you that not all of them were. But when Moses is writing this section and looking at it, he knows that there's some that's not participating and some don't. And we get into all of the things that were given. There were more willing to give than they needed because he put a halt to it at one point. He said, we got enough. So there's a lot of willing, but yet there's some that are not willing. If we roll this over to the New Testament and think about the New Testament, what is the number one thing? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Second like unto it, love thy neighbor as thyself. If you do that, then that places you in the position of always wanting to be willing and do the Lord's work. Questions, comments? Brother Jeremy, you just look like you're dying to get on my case. No? Absolutely. And Numbers also, when we went back and was lining out the route that they took, those two just fit real good together. Then we go to verse 25, and it says, all the women that were wise-hearted did spin with their hands and brought that which they had spun, both of blue and of purple and of scarlet and of fine linen. And all the women whose hearts stirred them up in wisdom spun goat's hair. So it wasn't just, if we go back into verse 23, it says, and every man. So the men had certain responsibilities in putting things together, and the women had some responsibilities. But on both occasions, it was those that had their heart stirred up, those that were willing and wanted. And verse 27 says the rulers. Now, who would be the rulers? We just had a mass exodus of shepherds out of the land of Egypt. Who would be the rulers that we're talking about? Moses had set it up into the tens, hundreds, and thousands group. However, I don't think that that's what this particular verse is talking about. Brother Klein? Now we're back to tribes, and if you think about it this way, each tribe is represented. And within each tribe, well, let's break it down to today. In most families today, there are either patriarchs or matriarchs, right? Or both. But generally speaking, if you look back in a family unit, there's one that you look to for guidance over things, and it's the older person. Here, where it says the rulers brought the onyx stones, meant that they were in the position, and they were probably the more affluent of the group, and princes and leaders of the tribes generally were more well off than those that didn't fall in that category. And it was the rulers that brought the valuable stones. The rest brought clothes and the gold earrings and things they'd taken from the Egyptians. But the ruler was simply the leader, and they brought the stones to set for the ephod and the breastplate. Verse 29 then says, the children of Israel brought a willing offering unto the Lord, every man and woman whose heart made them willing to bring for all manner of work which the Lord had commanded to be made by the hand of Moses. If you can't tell the emphasis I'm placing on this chapter to this point, we can go back and look. Verse 5, willing. Verse 21, heart stirred up. 22, willing, willing, willing. So your heart's got to be in the right place. Now, when we look at verses 30 through the end of the chapter, Moses said unto the children of Israel, See, the Lord hath called by name Bezaleel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, and he hath filled him with the Spirit of God, and wisdom, and understanding, and in knowledge, and in all manner of workmanship, and to devise curious works. Now, some of you have different translations than I. I use the King James because I'm familiar with it and I'm comfortable with it. New King James and other translations, instead of curious, they have cunning. And there are other words that are used. What does yours say, Andrew? Artistic. So, and that's generally the meaning there is this person that Moses has named is an artisan. He knows his craft and he is to devise things. Now, there are a lot of people in the scientific field, and if you look at your history and anthropology and all of that, ologies, they want it to be that people that lived this long ago didn't know how to work in metals and iron and do craft work to this degree. And that is because they go strictly on the evolution side of things and say that man started out just using stones and sticks and things of that nature. If you believe the Bible, and I do, if you go back into Genesis chapter 4, Genesis chapter 4, and look at verses 21 through 22. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all such as handle the harp and organ. And Zillah, she also bare Tubal-Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. If you believe the Bible, and I do, as I said, do you believe for 1 minute that God created man and didn't give him the knowledge he needed and the instructions he needed to do the things he needed to make it in this world? Now, he didn't give him all the computer technology that we have today and things of that nature, but it says in chapter 4 of Genesis, long before the book of Exodus here is taking place, that people had the skill to work in metal. Questions, comments? Right. Oh, absolutely. My tenure in the Air Force in various positions, I always got the blame or credit for things that the organization did, but it was the organization that was doing the work. The work that the people did that worked for me, they made me look good or bad. Same thing occurs in the Army, doesn't it, Brother Jeremy? Absolutely. Verse 33 then says, in the cutting of the stones to set in them and carving of the wood to make the manner of the cunning work or the artistic work. And he hath put in his heart that he may teach, both he and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach of the tribe of Dan. Them hath he filled with wisdom of heart to work all manner of work of the engraver, of the cunning workman, of the embroiderer, in blue and in purple and scarlet and in fine linen, and of the weaver, even of them that do any work, and of those that devise cunning or artistic work. So God gave them the knowledge they needed if they hadn't already acquired it through him from those that taught. Questions or comments then to this part through the collection for and the setting up who would be doing the work? Because chapter 36, yes, sir. That's correct. He never requires of you something that he has not given you the ability or the knowledge to handle. Chapter 36 and then into 37 deals with the construction of the tabernacle. And this is where I said we was going to skip a big portion of it because we don't need to know how many sockets were under each board, because we can tell you today, and by service time tonight, you'll have forgotten it. But if you recall the videos and the film that we had, or the PowerPoint presentation we had, the tabernacle, it was set up, it had a perimeter with all this stuff on it. There was an entrance, and who was lodging before the entrance? Who was on the east side of the Levites? Moses and Aaron were at the entrance. Then you go into the outer court. There's the things at the outer court. Then you get to the Holy of Holies that's got the curtain and entrance, and then go into the where the Ark of the Covenant is, with the table of showbread and things of that nature. Right. Anything else then on chapter 36 that deals with where everything goes and how it's all put together? Must have been awfully impressive. I agree with you on that one. Yes, sir. I'm glad you finished that sentence the way you did. Things that we should be doing today, because to me, the biggest takeaway, and I know we hadn't read through it and all, but the biggest takeaway from it for me, when you look at the whole tabernacle, is the way it was. They had to follow God's pattern exactly. If they had deviated from that pattern that God had given them, what would have happened? There would have been severe consequences. And if you also notice that there was an organizational structure, and there were Levites that were camped on the north, east, south, and west side of the tabernacle. We just said Moses and Aaron was camped at the east side because that was the entrance. Why was it so important for them to be camped on the east side? Brother Jeremy comes out of the Army. I was Air Force, the Terry Army. You was everything. But in a military movement, there is an organizational structure, and the Levites on each side had specific chores, specific duties that they had to carry out. In the church today, it was established the same way that they had to follow the pattern exactly or be out of step with God. We need to follow the Bible today accurately, or we will be out of step with God. They had an organizational structure. Today, the church has to have an organizational structure. So when it says that the Old Testament is our schoolmaster, if we go back and look at it, it truly will school us on how things are supposed to be. Questions, comments? Yes, sir. And that was in 1970, and if you factor in that gold in 1970s were selling for $32 to $34 an ounce, and today it's fluctuating between $1,500 and $1,600 generally for an ounce. How valuable will that be today? Very.
I was in Egypt and had the ability to go into the museum and see a chariot from the Pharaoh that was overlaid with gold. And that was impressive. But this is so much more impressive with everything that they overlaid with gold. It must have been really awesome.
Must have been. And all the, we didn't get into all the makings of the stuff, but the layers that they put it in, and a lot of it was covered with badger skin. It was a logical process because the top coating there of badger skin, what makes that so valuable? Waterproof. So they had their way of doing things. Now, like I say, chapter 37 deals with the making of the items in it. If you go, it starts out with the making of the ark. Now, verse 36 had already dealt with the tabernacle part. Now we're dealing with the making of the ark itself, verses 1 to 9. And then picking up with verse 10 through 16, it's making the table. 17 through 24 is making the lampstand. And 25 through 29 is making of the incense. So that takes us through chapter 37. Questions or comments on that one? Making the items in the Holy of Holies. Okay. When we get down to chapter 38, again, we're dealing with the altar of the burnt offering, how it's to be made. Starting with verse 8, it deals with making the laver of brass, how it's to be made. And I think it interesting. He made the laver of brass and the foot of it of brass, of the looking glasses of the women assembling, which assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And he made the court on the south side southward. The hangings of the court were of fine twined linen, 100 cubits. How long is 100 cubits if we put it into feet? Pardon? Roughly 150 feet. That takes up quite a space, doesn't it? This room here is 60 by 60. So more than twice the length of one wall here. I'm sorry, who are the ministering women? What verse are you on there, please? Verse 8? That's a good question. Brother Clance, you got an answer? We're in chapter 38, verse 8. He's getting up to count, so I'll let him answer this Wednesday night. Serving women? Well, I asked for y'all's opinion or what y'all thought about it, because when it says here that he made this, and then as Brother Clint said, the women is in italics, meaning it's been provided by the translators and of the King James, which assembled at the door. But I would take this to be that it would be those women that we've already looked at who were involved in the making of various items, the weaving and et cetera, that they were involved in that process. When we get down to verse 21, as Brother Jeremy Day had mentioned just before he got up and abandoned me, it starts talking about the sum of all the materials that was used for the building of the tabernacle. This is the sum of the tabernacle, even of the tabernacle of testimony, as it was counted according to the commandment of Moses, for the service of the Levites by the hand of Ithamar, son to Aaron the priest. And Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, made all that the Lord commanded Moses. And with him was Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, an engraver, and a cunning workman, an embroiderer in blue and in purple and in scarlet and in fine linen. All the gold that was occupied for the work in all of the holy place, even the gold of the offering, was 29 talents and 730 shekels after the shekel of the sanctuary. And then we get to the silver. And as Brother Golden had mentioned, what he had read about the value of it back in 1970s, just the gold would have accounted for about $500,000. So if we look at it, there was a lot of material that was given. And where'd all this material come from? Where'd all the gold and silver come and brass come from? Pardon? From the Egyptians, but it was from the willing heart of the Israelites who had, I guess requested would be the correct word, requested the Egyptians give them things. So in essence, the Egyptians paid for it, but the Israelites gave this of a willing heart. And then it goes on to tell how everything was made and put together. Brother Day has left. I'll leave him 39 and 40 to do Wednesday night. But is there any questions or comments on 35 through 38? You didn't think I could get through 4 chapters today, did you? Thank y'all so much.